Everyone. Hello, can you hear me? Is that nice and loud? Good. Welcome to St. Mark's Church. And it's my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for coming out on this dreadful evening of weather, but hopefully it's going to be definitely worth it, because my name's Tim, I'm the vicar here, and it's my pleasure to welcome the wonderful Peter Ormerod here tonight. A wonderful, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
First and foremost, a wonderful human being, and secondly, a fantastic journalist. And we're really pleased to have him here tonight. And the author of the book that we're all going to be discussing tonight. So thank you so much, Peter. But before we open up the conversation, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about art at St. Mark's, which is what this event is part of. And an expression of who we are as a church. And it's not about saying that art is sort of some kind of a small decoration in life, but actually it's how we make sense of who we are as a human being and make sense of this world that we're living in. And art requires imagination, and I think the one thing we appreciate about David Bowie is his fantastic imagination, and sometimes our imagination can get dulled or reduced somewhat by what's going on in the world, politics and life, but actually art at St. Mark's is celebrate using our imagination in big ways and in tiny ways. And of course, Bowie used his imagination in a fantastic way. So we're here to talk about that tonight. We're going to celebrate Bowie's work, but also we're going to celebrate Peter's work, because it is brilliant. I've read the book. It's brilliant. So, Peter, was there a particular Bowie song, instant, or time that made you think, there's a book in this?
So there sort of was. So the answer is basically yes, but it was partly Bowie, and it was partly a member of this very church.
Oh, really?
It's partly Sheila Robinson.
Sheila Robinson,
who I know isn't here tonight.
Yes.
But it's partly her. There is so the background is, so people know backgrounds. I grew up in a church family. My dad was a vicar, and often that's enough to send, the children of vicars tend to run up as far as they can from the church, because you sort of see it warts and all, and it's mostly warts, it turns out. But I was, but for some reason it stayed with me, and I've remained interested in religion and the church and so on. And I was also loved music from a very young age as well, and got into Bowie when I was 17 years old. And the album that converted me, and it feels like a sort of conversion experience, was an album called Hunky Dory. And on that album, there are these songs that talk about these sort of spiritual things. That talk about faith and belief and these weird, slightly occultish, weird things as well. And I didn't quite understand what he was singing about, but it stayed with me, all of that stuff. And I just read more and more and listened to more and more. And increasingly, I realized that the spiritual stuff was actually really important. But it took me years before thinking, maybe I could write a thing about this. And it was partly because I was thinking, I'm surprised no one has. And I was thinking, maybe I could try. And so I did some dabblings online, put a few bits online, my initial thoughts. And the first person who really connected with them was Sheila.
Yeah.
I think David's here.
David's
here, I think. So.
Yeah, David's husband.
And she said, and if you don't know, Sheila's a great writer herself.
Mm-hmm.
writes lovely books, and very, very enthusiastic about all of that. And she was the first person who said, I think maybe this could make a book.
Great.
So that's really how the thought of that first really struck me. And then the more I wrote, the more I realized, hang on a minute, there's absolutely loads here. I hadn't really realized how much there was when I started out on it. So so she was, I hope, vindicated. So I give her a lot of credit. If you don't like it, you can give her the blame, I suppose. But But she's been a really key part, and it's a lovely thing. This church means a lot to me. It's a place that I, very close to my heart, and so to have that connection is really lovely thing. So it's a great, beautiful thing.
Thank you, Peter. I grew up kind of alongside Bowie in the background of my life. It wasn't a huge part, but I always, I kind of knew the headlines of Bowie, and I knew about the fashion, the music. But what I learned from the book was the struggle at the beginning of his career. It took a long time to get that success. How do you think? How important was that struggle at the beginning of his career? How important was that time for him in his success in the end?
Yeah, I think it can get overlooked, a lot of that stuff. People sometimes, you can get the impression sometimes that it was all effortless and that he just emerged as this fully formed rock god or something. And it wasn't like that at all, as you say. There was so much grafting before that and so much struggle before that. There was about 10 years of it, or nearly that, before he rarely had a sustained period of fame. And it was band after band, song after song. But looking back, so much of that time, which I don't think artists get so much these days, I think a lot of it was so important for him developing as a songwriter, developing in a sense as a performer, and also developing resilience, confidence, this sense of whatever people say. Whenever people say no, that doesn't mean no forever. That just means not yet, or whatever, So all of those things, I think, were so integral, and a certain freedom to change things, a certain resistance just to stay still, a certain restlessness, and so all of that was so important, I think. And so that was integral to those to his pre-fame years, and spurred him on during the fame years.
Great. Some of you may have seen the visuals we had going on at the start, and that's one thing you associate with Bowie, sort of this constantly reinventing himself with the masks, the characters, the personas. And do you see that as more of an escape or experimentation or something a bit deeper about who we are as humans? How do you see that sort of expression of?
I think there's some of all of those things. I think there was. So the character he's probably most famous for is Ziggy Stardust, right? This extraordinary alien rock god sort of figure. And you might think that's the sign of a very confident man, that he could assume that sort of persona. But it was actually came about because he didn't have confidence.
Right.
And it was a way of giving him the confidence to perform. It was a way of giving, because he didn't think he was a good performer or a good singer. And so adopting that persona was a way of finding things in himself, or being able to express things in himself that he wasn't otherwise confident of doing. And so we can sometimes think of those characters, even in our daily lives or whatever, we can think of masks that we might wear or whatever, as things that cover us up. But they can be things that help us be bolder, actually, as well. Yeah. So I think there was a bit of that. I think there was experimentation. There was a sense of trying new things, seeing what worked, and have that sort of courage to it. And I think also there is a thing about, you can think of those characters as disguises or costumes or about pretending, but actually I think so much of it, I think there's an honesty to it as well.
Yeah, great.
Actually, and I think it's about, I think a lot of rock stars might pretend to be honest by presenting themselves in this honest way, but there's a deeper sort of, it sounds a pretentious thing to say, but there's a deeper sort of honesty, I think, in saying, no, this isn't quite me, this is a different thing. So yeah.
So the subtitle of the book is The Search for David Bowie and the Search for Life, Death and God. Thinking about that search for God in the room we're in, would you say that, because God appears in Bowie's songs in complex ways, sometimes it's quite hard. What you do great in the book is show the reader where it is clearly God. Would you say that Bowie's intrigued by God's silence or God's sort of mystery? it's almost impossible to answer, but hazard a guess.
I think one of the things that makes his career so fascinating was that he was interested in different things at different times with regard to God, actually. So in the mid-70s, so just to sort of plonk ourselves in the mid-70s for a bit, he was going through this really terrible time. He got enmeshed in sort of black magic and in really dark stuff, like profoundly dark stuff, to the point where he thought he was seeing Satan emerge from his swimming pool and stuff, like seriously messed up stuff. And cocaine, obviously drugs were part of that and whatever, no doubt as well. But it was a real time of terror for him. And what he did, part of his way out of that was turning to, I know it sounds a very Christian thing to say, but like turning to God, basically. It's a certain, he sings this hymn, basically, called Word on a Wing, it's called. And that was part of his plea for salvation at that time. So for him, it was a plea for God, but God's presence in that song is so sort of vivid for me, I think. So that's the presence, but later you get him dealing with the silence as well. And that's kind of heartbreaking. I know some of his later work isn't as revered as his early work, but he did some fantastic albums later on in his career. And one of them is called Heathen. It came out in 2002. And it's just song after song of wrestling with God, right? They almost sound like psalms in a way, if you look at some of the words. And there's this real sense of where are you, God? This real sense of, come on, show yourself to me. Make yourself real. And it's kind of quite devastating to hear some of that stuff. So that deals partly with his silence, but also with God's absence as well, I think, on that album, and he confronts that on that album as well, in the sense of, well, what if all this has been meaningless? Have I stared too long? Is there no reason? Is everything basically meaningless? So he confronts all of those things, and I think they're both of those are in their own ways really creatively stimulating for him, but also real for him as well, and I think that comes through in both of those ways.
Towards one of the sort of ongoing threads in the book is you tend to you link the depth of Bowie's spiritual searching for God and the good things of God and his creative output. You kind of I'm putting it in rather simplistic terms, but you say in the book that when he was at his most creative, he was also doing the most soul searching for God. Would you make that link as well?
Yeah, I would. I'm a little hesitant in some ways to make it quite so closely as that, but I think there's something in that. I think basically most people probably who know about Bowie know he was, the 70s was in a way, his strongest decade of creativity. That happens to be the decade where he was the most spiritually wild, let's say, or the most spiritually searching, and that's where that comes through most obviously in his work. So you go from this early 70s, so even before then, you get a bit of Buddhism coming into his songs, and then you get a bit of sort of like occultist sort of stuff, Aleister Crowley sort of stuff, quite dark stuff, weird stuff, whatever, and you get a bit of Kabbalah coming in, and it's all quite, and some of that gets very troubled, but you can't deny that the work that comes out of it is stunning, right? Phenomenal work through that time. Whereas the 80s, where he gets, people pillory that, I think a bit unfairly in some ways, but they do. But there's some justification for it. The 80s, where he was creatively far less sort of vibrant, that stuff seems to disappear from his music as well. So and it's like he gets lost. It's like he starts looking for something else, and and he gets led astray. And so that absolutely is, and then in the 90s, he gets more engaged in religion and spirituality again in an overt way, and his spirituality and his creativity really blossoms again then, as it does at the very end as well with his last album, Black Star, which draws on so much, the imagery around it draws on so much of the stuff, and it's almost like a condensed version of the book. It's like everything's in there. So yeah, and it's a fantastically creative, brilliant album. So yeah, I do think there is a connection. I think his best work for me came when he was closest to that search.
Yeah. Do you think that Bowie offers the world some kind of secular spirituality? Because spirituality is underpin a lot of his work. Do you think he offers some kind of something that we would call secular spirituality?
I think we have to be a bit careful sometimes with the word spirituality, because I think it can get a bit lumped in with like wellness and all that sort of stuff these days, right? It can get a bit. Yeah, there's a slight lifestyle-y vibe to that word, I think, these days. And when Bowie talked about it, however, or when Bowie conceived it or pursued it, it wasn't that. It was, there's hell in there, right? There's suffering, there's appalling pain and torment in there, right? So it wasn't what we might now think of as, hey, spirituality. It's far more profound than that. He said himself, there's this quote he says about religion is for people who believe in hell. Spirituality is for people who've been there, he said.
Interesting. What a great quote.
Which is an interesting quote. And that, I think, shows... I think that sums things up pretty well from his perspective. So, and it was for him, as spirituality meant, yeah, that there's God, or there's something out there. Religions, organized religions, as we see them, are inadequate, basically, or they're flawed, or they are corrupting, or blasphemous, almost, right? In the sense that they destroy the message that they're supposedly proclaiming. So for him, he had very little truck with organized, what anyone who's got close to a church would find the phrase organized quite amusing. But they, however, yeah, we know what that phrase means. And he just found that, yeah. So he had little truck with it. He found it actually actively bad at times, but still wanted to proceed with this search, and still wanted to look for what was out there. And I think that's what he, that's that tension between, or the difference maybe between spirituality and religion. Yeah.
And what about you, Peter, if you don't mind me asking? In your journey from Sheila to today, from the conversation with Sheila to today, has Bowie's life, Bowie's work sort of prompted soul searching for you? Has it shifted you? Has it changed you? Or did it change how you see things? Or what's been the effect to you?
Yeah, well, so probably a couple of things, I'd say. There was, when I was writing the book, I hadn't really realized where it would take me. I hadn't realized, even though I knew his career very well, I hadn't really, it's a funny thing writing a book, because you have to explore your inner thoughts and think about this stuff a lot. And I got to the point with it where it was like, hang on a minute, so much of this, by the end of his life, so much of this is about love, and it's about life itself. And actually, Brian McLaren, who some of you may know is a Christian writer, he did a study of creative people over history, and he said that so many of them end up at a point, judging from their work and their art, where they get to the point where they see that life is a gift and love is the point.
Oh, interesting.
And that, I think, is where it's very presumptuous of me to make claims for where Bowie ended up. But judging from his work certainly for me exudes that. Now, what that does when you sort of think about that yourself, it does bring yourself up short, and it does think, well, how do I live? Do I live like that? You know, do I love like that? You know, so there's a chunk of that, and there's a sense of you know, the passage of time. Am I just letting things slip by and all that sort of stuff. So there's that sort of soul searching. There is also, I have to say. So I should say the book came. So my mum died the night before the book came out, and when you write a book that has the words life, death, and God on the cover, all those things so real, really, and it can look like a really cool phrase. It can look like a really cool cover. It can look like those words are really wow, interesting words. But they're not words. They are words, but they're real things, and big things, and not to be dealt with lightly, and not to be not just to be considered a catchy marketing thing. You know? So it did. So those are probably the two main ways in which I sort of had to reflect quite a lot.
What do you think Bowie would think of your book?
Oh, he'd. I think I don't know. I don't want to flatter myself too much. I think he'd probably think it was. He'd probably be grateful that someone had written on this subject, because he always said one of the things he really hated was the whole, hey, David Bowie was all about cha-cha changes, and he was the chameleon of rock and all that sort of stuff, and he really didn't like that sort of stuff. And he said himself that actually there's a continuity throughout his work, and the key line is the spiritual stuff. And it just so happened that no one, as I say, has followed his path in that way as this book does. So I think a bit of me would like to think he'd be grateful. A bit of me would also think he'd absolutely laugh his head off at it, frankly. Right. And he'd probably say I've got a whole or misread. I don't know. He'd probably think I'm reading too much into things or whatever. But I think I'd like to think that he'd be glad it exists at least. So,
I think he would. I think he'd be flattered.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
I would like to open it out to the audience for any questions, but I have one last question. Mm-hmm. Did you ever get sick of Bowie in this process? You ever think, oh no, not another Bowie song, or any point where you just thought, oh, I'm done with it, or was it a continual love?
Weird things happened during it. So there were points where I was like where I thought I was Bowied out, or on the cusp of it, even me. On the cusp of it. And then something would happen where it would be like, oh, hang on a minute, this is amazing again. And so a song like Heroes, right, which you might think everyone's heard. How many times do we need to hear Heroes, right? And yet that song, during the course of me writing the book, just found this new life and a new vibrancy where it's almost over. If it comes on the radio or whatever, I can't listen to it. Because it's not because I'm bored with it, but because it's like it feels like too much now. It's just so powerful. I know it sounds a bit pathetic in a way, but it's so powerful for me now, that song. And a few others as well. And things like his, like songs that people don't really think about, like songs on the side. There's an album called Low, right, which is one of my favorite albums. And most people focus on the first side of that because it's got really great songs in it. Second side of that is a whole load of sort of instrumentals. And people don't really focus on those quite so much. But those have acquired a massive, massive power for me now. So there are these things that, so basically every time I thought I've had enough of this guy, he just, honestly, it just pulls me back in again.
We run a youth group here with teenagers, and they all love Bowie.
Wow.
Yeah, he's just the artist that keeps on giving to the next generation because he's so fantastic.
It's reassuring to hear that. Gives gives you hope.
It does give you hope. So I'm going to open it out to the floor now. We've got Marcella. Do you have a microphone, Marcella? Yes, she does. Thank you, Marcella. So, we've got a question right here at the front. Thank you very much. We'll give you the mic so then we can, yeah.
It's not that I like the sound of my own voice, but here it is. Peter, how did you go about research then into the book? Did you meet any of the family or descendants? Or?
So it's probably a good job that I didn't meet any of his family or descendants. I know. So the research was weirdly some of the research I did when I didn't realize I was doing research, like 30 years ago, when I'd watched loads of his interviews in a slightly weird, obsessive sort of way, I have to say. And I'd watch his interviews and listen to interviews and read stuff, and I didn't realize, that just stayed in my head, a lot of that stuff, partly because I read it so much of it. And so some of the research, some of that I just drew on, I just know that stuff, which is really nice that I was just there to draw upon. And there was obviously reading books, so there were some books I hadn't read. There's an amazing book called Psychic Self-Defense that I write about in the book, which is an astonishing book. Things like that were new to me. But the best moment in the whole book, in the whole of the research, came at the very end. So there were literally 2 days before I had to submit the final manuscript. I went down to London, where they just opened up Bowie's archive. They just had it down there at V&A East Storehouse. And they'd just literally done that. And I was only the second person in there. And I was, basically they had a box of his notes, just handwritten notes. And they said, we don't know what's already in here. We haven't catalogued these. We haven't indexed. We don't know really what these are. But it sounds like they might be interesting for you. So I had a look at them, absolutely blown away by them. And that's because I had feared that maybe this whole God thing was maybe I'd gone off on a complete tangent, got the whole thing wrong. All those sort of doubts you have. And then reading his notes, it was like, oh, hang on a minute. And there were Bible quotes in there, there were spiritual reflections in there, hymns, titles in there. There were these incredible things, and a note saying love is stronger than death, and these incredible love conquers, these incredible things that was a real, to use a religious sort of word, a real blessing, that moment. And it was like, oh, hang on a minute, this is kind of what it's all about. And I was able to get a few bits of that into the book, just to squeeze that in. So that was an amazing part of the research. I'm so glad that I was able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Anyone else got a question? Yes, I've got a hand at the back. Thank you.
It was interesting to hear you say that his kind of best work came about when he was struggling the most. And I suppose that's maybe a bit of a common theme with a lot of artists of different kinds, that it's when they're struggling, when they're facing difficult times, that the best art or the best music or whatever seems to come out. And in some ways it seems a little unfair, really, that you can't get good art out of contentment or whatever. And, is that actually true? Are there, I suppose you've only looked at Bowie, but it just, as you were saying it kind of struck me that does seem to be such a common thing. When you think, you think of the blues being about a lot of the struggles that people in the southern states of America went through, and all those kind of things. And I suppose it's just interesting that we kind of enjoy something that has come out of somebody's kind of pain and struggle, and the kind of contradiction around that. I'm not sure if that's a question. So maybe I'll come up with an actual question, which is, where does Tin Machine fit into all of this?
I'll address the first part. I'll address that first bit first. I think absolutely. I agree. I think there's something about. Can you hear me? Okay, by the way, I realise I'm fiddling with my mic a bit. Yeah, the struggle thing, the link between struggle and creativity, I think is really interesting. But I think you can struggle in different ways. And so the classical image of the struggling artist is the impoverished man or woman struggling to make ends meet or whatever, but who have to create or have to feel they have to express their pain or suffering in that sort of way. Obviously, in Bowie's case, a lot of his life, certainly from the 90s onwards, from the time he got married, basically, he wasn't really struggling in any material sense. He had houses, he had a wonderful wife, he was content in that way, but he was still evidently at points struggling spiritually, and still found that there were aspects to his life, to his spiritual life, that were a real problem, and that were gnawing at him. And of course, without wishing to sound too crass, of course, the end of his last album was made when he'd been diagnosed with cancer, and it's a phenomenal work. And so there are different ways, I suppose, of struggling. But you'd also say that in the 80s, where it seemed like he was doing better financially, that wasn't a great time of his creativity. So yeah, so I think with Bowie there is a sort of connection there, but it's a fairly complex one. In terms of where Tin Machine come into it, for those of you who don't know, so Bowie became this big sort of mainstream superstar figure in the 80s, and in a way that made people think that he was selling out a bit, and he was very unhappy creatively at that point, and so he decided to start a band, disappear within it. These four guys, and it was a very heavy rock, like very abrasive band. And they weren't ever going to sell billions of records, but that was such an important part of his creative resurgence, I think. And there's and no one really thinks about them or talks about them that much these days, but that was an integral part of him saving himself creatively. So I think there's in a more subtle way, there's spiritual grappling and yearning in there as well, I think. So yeah, but worth revisiting Tin Machine if anyone hasn't already. So yeah, take a listen. I mean, there are only about 3 really good songs, but it's worth exploring for that.
Thank you. Good question. Yes, question to my left.
What era of Bowie's music was he probably journaling the most in terms of making sense of his own development and his own? I know, for example, the Aladdin Sane was the persona he developed for that was an outpouring of sympathy for one of his brothers. Who's being really oppressed at the time. But in terms of his development, what is the richest period, do you think, in terms of journaling for him?
So creatively, I do think the mid-70s is the most, or it's the sort of 71 to 76 probably is where the journey is at its most almost life-threatening. Actually, it's so existential, and it's so potent and is so evident in his work. And it's really dark stuff, some of that stuff, but amazing stuff comes out of it. I'd also say, but in terms of his spirit, in terms of his personal thing, it's almost the 1990s, you might say, because after he gets married, around the time he gets married, he starts talking a lot about God in this really overt way, in a way he hadn't in some ways before, in a way that, almost Christians would understand. And that's around the time of when he said the Lord's Prayer, if you remember. He did a concert at Wembley. Well, he was part of a concert at Wembley Stadium, 1992, and it was a concert for AIDS awareness. And he at one point, he had a friend who was really suffering with AIDS, and during his set, he knelt down and prayed the Lord's Prayer in front of 90,000 people. And I think that phase where he's taught, where he seems really engaged with God in a rarely explicit way. And I think that was and he around that time quit booze as well. And I think around that time, in terms of his personal development, I think that was a really important part of it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Great question. And then you can watch that clip on YouTube of David Bowie saying the Lord's Prayer. It's very powerful thing to watch. Any more questions for Pete? Yes. One from Matt. Thank you.
For someone who clearly knew Bowie's material and stuff very well before you did this, was there anything you found particularly surprising or unexpected as you were going along that, just stood out to you as, oh, that wasn't something that I thought would be there, or
it happened
challenged
a lot.
your expectation?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely happened a lot, actually. So one of the things was actually Ziggy album, which is one of his most famous records. And I'd never really noticed all the sort of religious imagery there is on it, right? And until I was really listening closely to it and looking at it. And so there's, I'd always been interested, there's a song called Soul Love, which mentions, which is a whole load of like religious stuff pops up in there. You get a priest and you get church and you get all sorts of stuff, the word and whatnot pop up in there. But also this image of the flaming dove, and I had no idea really what he meant, and it was always a strange image to me. I didn't know what was going on there. And then I realized, and I should have known this, being a vicar's son and everything, should have known that it's a historic image used for the Holy Spirit. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's just a coincidence. And then a weird thing was that I went to his old church, so the church where he was a choir boy, his local church down in Bromley, and he was about 10 years old. And the thing that stuck out of me, and it's that looms over like that window does here, over the choir stalls where he would have sung, beautiful stained glass window. The top of it is a flaming dove, and it's one of those things where, and you know, I don't know if it was a deliberate reference, or a subconscious thing, if it had nothing to do with it. But it's one of those beautiful moments where everything sort of came sort of together. So yeah, there were loads of those moments actually. Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, question from at the front. Thank you. Great question. Thank you, Matt.
Question short but deep. When you first heard Black Star, how did it affect you?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, he released this album, Black Star, which is his last album. Released it basically on a Friday, and he died on the Sunday. So there was this very brief time where you could hear it and not think about his death. And I really cherish that little bit of time. It struck me before his death, it was this album that was fascinating, went off in extraordinary directions, was his most vibrant work that he'd done for a long time. His most interesting musically. It was mysterious and it was odd, and I didn't know what was going on all the time with it. But it sort of struck me in that way, and intrigued me, and I wanted to listen to it again and again. But then you realize, just a couple of days later, you realize the context in which it was recorded. And I think there can be a danger in making it too much about death, that record. When even though he knew he knew he was ill while he was making it, and he was maybe confronting the reality of death, the album for me is so full of life, actually. That's the thing that comes across to me. It's absolutely in the moment. It's absolutely now. It's spontaneous. It's full of action, full of activity. And although some of the songs sound quite morbid in a way, the music, the instrumentation is so alive. It's so, and Bowie is so caught up in that at some times. It's so absolutely the moment, and now being so important. And so it's a way of, for me, it became an album of confronting death by affirming life, I'd say. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Great question. Any more questions? Yes, we have a question right here at the front. Thanks, Marcella.
When Bowie was killing off all his personas, like the Ziggy and others, do you think he was experiencing death and rebirth right from there on in?
Interesting. I think, so something we haven't really talked about that much is Buddhism, actually. And Buddhism was, in a way, one of his first key influences. And he got into it in the early mid-60s, from what I can tell. And a big part of that is rebirth, of course, and change and impermanence. And he got into it for various reasons, but he got to the point where he was almost wanted to become a monk, as you probably know, but didn't, which is probably for the best for all of us. And he was, but some of that stuff really stayed with him, and I think it gave him the freedom to experiment in that way, and to move from character to character, and to embrace that. So yeah, I think you can probably see that as some sort of cycle of death and rebirth. Absolutely, it's a really interesting way of looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. Any more questions from the floor? Great. Well, I think we should give you a round of applause, Peter. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as I said, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. It's a wonderful way to support a local author, journalist. So thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to Charlie at the back for doing the sound and tech. Thank you very much, Charlie. And thank you to Marcella, who's organised everything in the background. And thank you so much, Marcella. And Warwick Books, I've forgotten them. Mog from Warwick Books. Thank you so much for providing the books. Thank you. So thank you for everyone. Signed books are available, £20, which is an absolute bargain. This is a fantastic book, so please do buy a book. And if you're on the socials, take a picture of you holding the book next to Peter and say, this is a fantastic book. And tell all your friends, tell all your families, tell your enemies, tell everyone about this book, because it is fantastic. It's the Guardian Book of the Day, wasn't it? I saw it. So impressive.
Talk Sport Book of the Week last week.
Talk Sport Book of the Week. There we go. Look at that. Crossing
that's
genres.
there we go, isn't it? Absolutely.
That genre. That is unbelievable. So please do buy the book. Grab another glass of wine if you'd like one. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.